All right, good morning, everyone. We are going to get started with our agenda today. We have a full agenda, commissioners, so I'm going to try to keep us moving. We also have an executive session, multiple executive sessions. What I will do is I'm going to split for an executive session before we take up our item number 8 so that we can get a legal opinion. So I will ask for an executive session, we'll go into executive session, then we'll come back in. So to get us started today, do we have the health department here yet, or should we start with item number 2?
We should start with the master plan.
Okay. So commissioners, we are going to get a full briefing and update on our response to the COVID-19 crisis. We'll talk about what the city is doing, what we will be doing over the next several weeks. We are expecting Adam London from the health department to join us. So we're going to wait until he gets here to move to that. So we'll start today with an update on what the plan is for our master plan update. So we'll ask Ms. Turkelson to come and join us for that update. Similar to presentations in the past, I'm going to ask us to hold tight with our questions until the end of the presentation, and then we'll give an opportunity for questions and comments, and then we will move on. So, welcome.
I feel guilty touching anything here.
It's all been wiped down.
All right, good morning,
And we
Commission.
sanitized. I should let everyone know, everything has been sanitized. Commissioners, even the microphones.
The phone things have been.
Even the phone things have been sanitized. So we are in a sanitized, clean place right now, and we are practicing social distancing.
Well, to those that follow me, I'm healthy this morning. So anyways, good morning, Commission. Thank you very much for this opportunity to allow the Planning Department to provide you with an update on where we are at with regards to prepping for the next master plan update. Layla Islani from the Planning Department is also here. She will serve as one of the project managers for the Planning Department as we guide the master plan update through the process. And so just as a note, this presentation was also given recently to the City's Planning Commission to let them know where we're at with regards to scoping some of the pre-planning work. We've really looked at this as a two-phase process. The first is more of a scoping phase for us to begin getting ready, both internally and externally, for a master plan update. And then the second phase would be more of the public-facing process, where it would be more, I think, typical of what the community would expect and more community involvement. So master plan really helps guide the future growth and development for the community. It is initiated by the Planning Commission, and then ultimately the City Commission we expect would exert your authority to adopt the master plan. These processes help build consensus and for that long-range vision, and also we typically look and try to set that vision out for about 10 to 20 years. Most master plans do go about 20 years. It provides us with an opportunity to look at some essential topics. So there are some requirements for what topics need to be considered by a master plan, but there's also opportunities for us to really look at things that are important to an individual community. So we look at what the population is and what the projections are. We certainly expect housing, affordable housing namely, to be more of a focus with this master plan update. Transportation, since the last master plan, we had the Vital Streets effort, making sure that we're aligning our land use with our transportation needs and desires, and also looking at different facilities that we've got. It also gives us the opportunity to incorporate topical concerns. So we expect climate resiliency or climate change to be a significant item for consideration, and we'll certainly partner with those departments such as Allison to help inform and help guide those topics. And ultimately, a master plan is necessary for a valid zoning ordinance. So we want to make sure that we look at the zoning ordinance as the tool that we use to implement the master plan or the vision. So those need to be concurrent and in order for us to make legal land use decisions. Since 2002, the city has taken on a number of major planning efforts that has really reshaped the city. And so when you look at the amount of work and change that has happened in our community, I think that really highlights the need to update our comprehensive master plan. And I think it's really interesting to look at the transition for where we were in 2000, 2002, and the types of projects and how they've evolved. And notably, the plans that we've taken on most recently, the area-specific plans, have really had an equitable development focus, or an equity focus generally. Also, with large planning topics, we've also had a number of area-specific plans where we've realized that a more fine-grained approach was needed for different communities, for different neighborhoods. And I think that also speaks to different development pressures or different issues that were happening within a neighborhood where a master plan really wasn't adequately providing guidance for how those decisions needed to be made. And so part of this process that Layla will speak to is really looking at these area-specific plans and determining which ones should be carried over. I think time will probably be an indicator of when they were completed, which ones would be carried over into the new master plan, and maybe which ones need to be updated, or which ones do we know need to be redone. And whether they get redone with this master plan process or in a separate planning process, we would need to define that still. It's important to note that planning takes time, or good planning takes time. And you know, when we look at the last planning or the recent planning efforts that we've had, these kinds of processes, because the consensus that's needed and the community involvement that's needed, those take time for us to put together, and notification requirements and such. And so I think it's important to highlight that these processes do not happen in a year. And I think the amount of engagement and work that gets done with the community really informs how long those processes should take. So we know that it's time for an update. Our plan was a 20-year plan, or 2002 is 20 years. We are almost there. We know that there's different needs that we've got, or different catalysts that have happened that have provided different opportunities for us to look at. We know that different concerns have changed since 2002. Equity, for example, was not really, if at all, a topic in 2002. And how do we blend that into our current processes? We also have the strategic plan that can help guide this. And ultimately, you know, just meat and potato wise, we know that some of our decision making at a land use perspective has been a little bit clunky in terms of where are our maps and our zoning ordinances and what are the needs of the community. So we're starting to see some of those challenges as we utilize our zoning ordinance, recognizing that it is time for a rewrite of our master plan. So there's different roles and responsibilities. So the next few slides really go through what are the community's roles, what are the planning commission's roles, and what are the city commission roles. And they are different. They're all related, but they're different. So community, we really look to the community to help us guide, you know, who should be on an advisory committee, or what steering committee members should be part of this process that would really be kind of a higher level, more entrenched in these processes. And we need help to understand what does the community think about a current master plan? Is it valid? Is it what's missing? What's working? What's not? How are our land use decisions impacting our community? So we need that feedback. Planning Commission enabling legislation is fairly specific, that the Planning Commission does initiate the master planning process and helps guide that process. The Planning Commission would serve on advisory committees and steering committees. They'd be part of selecting the consultant. And ultimately, they would be recommending the plan to the City Commission for adoption. The City Commission's role is that you help set the budget. You help align what the expectations are of the Planning Commission. We look to you to approve the contract. You'd formally adopt the master plan, or at least that's our expectation. And I say that because the enabling legislation gives you the option not to. That would, I think, be a little bit unusual and unexpected here. And you also, of course, set the budget for implementation. So if there's implementation needs that are associated with the master plan recommendations, then you would help give us the budget to make sure that those strategies or those recommendations are properly implemented. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Layla Aslani, to go through this pre-scoping phase and maybe a little bit more specificity as to what we can expect over the next probably 12 months.
Thank you, Kristen. Good morning. So when we started this work a little bit ago, we started by looking at what other cities have done recently. So we looked at both aspirational cities as defined by the Center for Opportunity Urbanism, and also peer cities as defined by the federal...
Hold on, Layla. Santi, is this related to this one? Okay. All right. Go right ahead.
As defined by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. So we looked at Minneapolis, St. Paul, Nashville, Oklahoma City, Portland, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, and Rochester, and we plan to look at more in the future. So if you have any suggestions of where we should look, let us know. We reached out to all these communities and asked them about their request for proposals, if they used a consultant, who they used, their budget, timeline, and their process in general. We also looked at a lot of their master plans and we reviewed them for themes of equity, sustainability, and housing, the topics that we've been hearing a lot about recently in our community. So what we found was the average length took about 3.5 years. There was a mix of traditional public meetings and then also going to where people are, so attending different festivals and events and doing outreach that way. Also, there has been a move for more online engagement, and then the meeting in a box concept was also used. St. Paul and Minneapolis, we found, had good engagement with people of color and low-income residents, and then Rochester and Cincinnati had really good youth engagement. So here's what we have: $125,000 to spend before the end of the fiscal year, and here's what we were planning to do. I will mention this was pre-corona, so we may need to update it slightly, but in April and May, we were going to have an MSU Extension Citizen Planner course for neighborhood and community leaders. That's sort of Planning 101 to get everybody up to speed on land use and planning. And then we were gonna train those about 15 people and then have them go out in their communities and host neighborhood engagement to review the current master plan, the 2002 master plan, as Kristen said, to review it, to see what's working, what's not working, what we need to change with this time around. And then also review any area-specific plans if they apply to their area. And then we were also planning to do site visits and planner exchanges. So some of those cities that we've looked at have their planners come here, us go there to learn more about the process. It is important to note that good plans do take investment. So we have $125,000 for this year. We're requesting $125,000 for next year. We've pulled some numbers from some recent plans and then our last master plan, and we adjusted them for inflation. So if we were to do our 2002 master plan today, it would cost over $800,000. So we just did a little benchmarking there with what that costs. We also have been looking at the strategic plan throughout this work. There are several goals in there that talk about the master plan, so we plan to align our work with the things that are mentioned in there. We also plan to have an equity focus, as Kristen mentioned. We plan to elevate neighborhoods of focus and other underrepresented communities, really leverage partnerships to do engagement, and then also remove barriers for participation. So offering childcare or meals or perhaps incentives for people to participate and give us feedback. We also plan to use the facilitator and ambassador model that we used with the South Division plan that was highly successful. So hiring people from the community to go out and engage and get people to come to meetings and get that feedback that we're looking for. And we also plan to, this is what a different city did, they had demographic metric goals for engagement, and then they checked after each phase to say, like, are we engaging people properly? Are we hitting the numbers that we want to hit to make sure that the people we're engaging, match the population here in Grand Rapids? And then we would adjust that as needed. So here's our proposed timeline again. This is pre-corona. So we were going to do the training this spring for the MSU Citizen Planner course, then have the book clubs, which we need to come up with a better name for that, but from May to October, and then go into writing the RFP and scoping using the information that we gather through these different outreach events. Interview consultants early next year, hire them, and then do some initial data gathering and begin the community engagement, widespread public process, kind of phase 2, if you will. So this is obviously subject to change based on the consultant we hire and what they're proposing. There's going to be a conversation more about that. But with each phase, we do want to check back with community to say, this is what we heard, and do a lot of checking back to make sure that we're moving in the right direction after each step. So the goal would be to then, at the end of 2022, begin the review process and the adoption process with adopting it, and in 2023, and then we'd move on to updating our zoning ordinance and implementation. And that's the end.
All right, thank you for that presentation. Commissioners, any questions?
Madam Mayor, I just have one.
Commissioner Moody?
I may have missed this, but I'm not sure. If you could just explain to me the book club, many grants and awards. Can you explain what that's about? I'm not clear.
Right, so we would have people that are trained through the 15 neighborhood leaders through the Citizen Planner course. That's by Michigan State University's Extension Office. They'd go through that training, and then they'd get together with people from their community and review the 2002 master plan. And we'd have different forms for them to fill out to kind of give us a feedback to discuss, kind of like a discussion guide, if you will, for the master plan, so we can figure out, are some of these concepts still working? What do we need to change? And that will help us scope to hire the consultant.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, did you have a note?
No, I'm clear.
You're
That
good?
made perfect sense.
Okay, so I'm going to go to Commissioner Isasi, and I know City Manager wants to weigh in, and Commissioner Park. Go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. You talked about at some point reviewing the current ASPs. Will you also be looking at areas that don't have one and how that fits into that, particularly Creston?
Yes.
Thanks.
So we are aware that there are some neighborhoods within the city that have been clamoring for an area-specific plan. And so I think it would be important or prudent for us to make sure that when we're scoping, that we identify those areas and allow for the development of what it would effectively be an area-specific plan for some of those neighborhoods. So yes, that is the intention, and I think that there is some work that can be done now, and Leila and I will help provide Creston, for example, with some maybe tasks that they could do to prepare themselves for when the consultant is hired.
Great, thanks. Commissioner Park, and then I'll have the city manager weigh in.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen, thank you for the clarification on who's going to do what, Planning Commission, City Commission, residents. That's going to be really, really helpful and important. Who's going to appoint the advisory committee? Whose responsibility is that?
Right now, we are working with the Planning Commission to appoint the advisory committee. So the Planning Commission is self-appointed 2 individuals. And so then we will be getting together to help identify, but I mean, we're open if City Commission has some ideas on who can serve as that initial advisory that would work directly with Leila and I.
Yes, thank you. Great presentation, quite clear, and I love the timeline, though we know it possibly could change. But to piggyback on Commissioner Reppart's question, I'm curious to know what's the best size for the steering committee for this type of work? Do we have any best practices about how many people should participate at that level?
I don't know that we have best practices. You know, in my head, I was sort of thinking that an advisory committee would be like a little bit of a smaller group, so 8 to 10 individuals that would really help guide staff through these early pre-plan phasing. So setting, helping guide some of the book club, again, we really need a sexier name than that, these book club processes, and looking for individuals that can serve as facilitators and ambassadors. So I was thinking that it might be a little bit of a smaller committee, kind of like a subcommittee group, and then the steering committee that would be formed could be the similar individuals, but I expect that that would be a larger group, and we would appoint that to get ready for the public-facing phase 2.
Sure, thank you.
Great, thanks. City Manager, any final thoughts?
Several. First of all, let me thank the staff for good work in getting us to this point. And I want to, in addition to some of the community engagement around stakeholders, I think it's important to note that it will help our efforts if we get a consultant that is very experienced in helping mid to large-sized cities through the process that could further advise us on how to do community engagement that has been effective in other communities once we get past the pre-planning phase. The other point I'd like to make this morning is while we are in emergency response mode now, ensuring the public health and safety regarding corona, we, as you will hear, have been thinking about the next phase of recovery. And there will be immediate short-term recovery, mid-term recovery efforts. And I would like us to consider this effort in the master plan as part of our long-term recovery efforts, because we're going to need to be thinking both short, mid, and long-term. And so I think this is a good initial step. The timing could not be perfect, any more perfect than where we are right now. And so I want to thank them for the work that they've done so far.
Thank you, City Manager.
And the Planning Commission also heard the similar presentation, correct?
They did, yes.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the update. All right, Commissioners, we are going to shift gear and we're going to go to our briefing on the current coronavirus crisis that we're all experiencing. And to tee this up, and before I turn it over to our City Manager, and I see Dr. Adam London arrived, thank you for joining us this morning for this important update. I just want to say a couple words. One, we're all well aware of how frightening this is for our community and the incredible anxiety and concerns that people have, not just in our community, but communities across the country. As the city manager has said, our number one priority is the safety of the residents who call Grand Rapids home. I've had the ability to see firsthand the incredible leadership team that we have here in the city work over this past week in pulling together an emergency response and doing that in close partnership with the county, so I want to help the county for that effort. And I also want to say how grateful I am to have such an incredible city team. You know, we have a lot of people who are working day in and day out to make sure that we're providing essential services and public safety during this difficult time. So I want to make sure that we all give this provide an opportunity to say thanks to our incredible team for continuing to work while many other people are staying home, rightfully so. We're going to encourage people to stay home. We're going to encourage people to wash their hands, encourage people to follow all of the precautions and recommendations that we're hearing both from the state and the CDC. So with that, I'm going to turn it to the city manager to get into the details of what we're doing here at the city. As well as provide Dr. Adam London an opportunity to give us an update on what the county is doing and some of the recommendations from our health department. Our health department is taking the lead. This is a public health crisis, and they are our expert. And I know that they've been working closely with the state and counties across the state to have a very coordinated and effective response. So City Manager, you want to take
Sure.
it from there?
Thank you, Mayor. My appreciation as well for the many city employees who have been participating in this response effort, along with our partners from both county and state, and their collaboration in this effort as well. So what you'll hear this morning is a three-part briefing, and I'm going to ask Ms. Farrell and Dr. London to come. The first part will be the state of our response at this point with both state of the country, state of the state, state of the county, and what we're doing here locally. And we'll hear from some of the both epidemiological and first responder summary of events. And then secondly, we will talk about I'll ask Deputy City Manager Eric DeLone to come and talk about the implication on city services, and we'll talk about some of the things that we have been doing and will plan to implement regarding the delivery of city services in light of some of the declarations that have been made both from the federal and state level as well as the county. And then thirdly, we will have a update on some of the things we're doing for our workforce. I'm going to ask Assistant City Manager Doug Matthews to do that. And so I believe it would probably be better if we get through the briefing, and then if you can hold your questions towards the end, all three parts will go, I presume, rather quickly.
Great. Thanks, City Manager. I was just going to say that we have a lot of information that's going to be shared right now. It's really important information, not just for all of us, but also for the public. And so we're going to get through the presentations, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments. Thanks.
Okay. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm Allison Ferroli, the Emergency Management Administrator for the City of Grand Rapids. So my goal is today is it's a very brief, high-level kind of a situation update of what's going on in regards to the COVID-19, the novel coronavirus that is impacting the whole globe. So one thing I do want to preface with this is that the information that is being gathered in regards to the situation is literally changing by the hour. Okay, so some of these numbers could actually be wrong at this point. We are getting updates as quickly as possible. So one thing I want to show here, this is a visual. The Michigan State Emergency Operations Center has a dashboard that has been shared to be able to give us a high-level observation of what is happening in Michigan and also just across the country. I will tell you that the confirmed cases in Michigan is actually 54 at this point, and the total U.S. cases and deaths are actually just changing, like I said, as we go through time. So with that, in regards to this dashboard visual here, just a couple things to keep in mind at a global level. Couple sources that we are constantly utilizing in gathering information, trying to understand what the impact and the pulse is of this pandemic across the world, is we are gathering information from the World Health Organization, the CDC, the Michigan State Department of Health and Human Services, and with that, the Emergency Management and Homeland Security Division within the state police, and then also working closely with our Kent County Health Department and partners there. It was announced yesterday through the World Health Organization that the number of cases that are outside of China have now are above the number of cases that are known that were confirmed in China. So that is something to keep in mind as a whole outside of the country of China. The globe is above that number. As of right now, 49 states, including District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the U.S. Virgin Islands have all informed us of cases that are going on. So this is definitely impacting everybody, especially in the United States. So what do we know? Up here on the top, you'll see this is kind of just a quick snapshot for the county. And this is information as of yesterday. So we are trying to get updates as we know as far as how many tests have been submitted from our county, what the outcome of those tests are, and what's pending. So as of right now, we still have 5 positive tests in the Kent County, and that, when we say Kent County, that includes the city of Grand Rapids. So the Kent County Health Department serves the city as well. So that's a combination number there. This just gives a kind of a timeline of some of the big picture items that have happened. The World Health Organization did declare this as a public health emergency of international concern at the end of January, on January 30th. And as we all are aware, things have changed drastically, especially in the last week, in regards to just how things are impacting our country. There's been a lot of travel restrictions that have come out from the U.S. State Department. The CDC has been great in trying to provide guidance for a variety of aspects in services. So a lot of things that for a while it was about how to deal with cruise ship travel, because that was a big impacted area. There is a lot of guidance coming out for law enforcement, fire, EMS, healthcare personnel, and other different avenues that they're seeing as kind of a need where folks are needing some guidance on. So we are taking that information and pushing it out to those folks as best as possible when we are getting that information. The state of Michigan did activate their Emergency Operations Center about 2 weeks ago, and they are utilizing that as a state level to coordinate resource requests, information sharing, and just coordinating all the activities that are going on. And the Kent County Health Department did activate their EOC as well, and with that, the Kent County Emergency Management Office has activated their EOC, and we're all working together with the Health Department, since they are the lead, to ensure that we are supporting them, but also taking the information and seeing how it's impacting the city and the county, and making sure that we are handling those issues as well. I will say that the Governor Whitmer has enacted multiple executive orders, and as you are hearing, they're more and more as we go through time. I have a list of those if you need copies of those, but there is a whole list that I just didn't put up there just to keep a high level at that point. Like I said, we are at 54 confirmed cases here in Michigan, and then 5 total in the county of Kent. As far as planning efforts go, I have been working closely with the health department for the last couple weeks as this became a known issue that was impacting not only us here in Michigan, but also just as the United States, to try and make sure we had a lead on some planning efforts and information so that we can support each other. One thing that as I've been doing is developing daily situation reports over the last actually about almost 2 weeks, gathering just facts and information and making sure our stakeholders in the community are aware of what's going on so they can start making high-level decisions on that. I am and a liaison within the Kent County Health Department's Incident Command, so I've been participating in those daily meetings to make sure that we have that connection of communication. So one thing with this is that we need to keep communication going, and there's no siloing of information, and that is part of that. And then also working very closely with the leadership here within the city to make sure that we are figuring out what this impact is going to be on essential services, which we will talk a little bit about later. One thing to keep in mind with this, I'm sure you've been hearing that's a pretty big deal, is that there is definitely a shortage of supplies. So personal protective equipment, otherwise known as PPE, is definitely in short supply, and it's not just us. It's definitely happening all across the United States. So that includes our PPE for our first responders and then at hospitals. So we are definitely keeping a close eye on what our stocks are as far as what we have in supply and we're making sure we're submitting requests into the state EOC as we should to help be able to make sure that we are showing the need, and then also when supplies do come in hand that we can get some of those supplies to help make sure our personnel are properly equipped. As far as the Grand Rapids EOC, we did activate last Thursday. And we're at a level 2 partial, but we're doing this at a virtual level. So one thing, we are practicing what we are preaching, trying to do social distancing and do daily virtual briefings. And we are identifying staff to hold specific roles within that EOC format to ensure that, again, our goal of an EOC is information sharing, coordination, and resource allocation. So really identifying what those gaps look like so that we can see if we can fix that need as a city, or if we need to go higher level to the state EOC. So that is where we're at this point, but I will turn it over to Dr. London and have him give me updates on the specific response in regards to the public health side of things. Thanks.
Thanks, Allison. And thanks to everyone here this morning, and thanks for modeling the way in social distancing for your meeting today. That's really helpful. And I also want to say thanks to the city manager and to Mayor Bliss. There have been a number of you who have been by our side throughout this process and this response. And really before cases were identified here in Kent County, you are by our side in helping to push out the communication messages and the prevention messages that we know are so important and continue to be so important. As Allison mentioned, we have 5 cases here in Kent County at this time that have been diagnosed. But I want to put a big asterisk on that because we know full well that there are far more cases in Kent County than those 5. The testing criteria has been very rigid. The number of tests have been very limited from the very beginning. And so we know that there are many people who are either asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic that have this. And for that reason, I think that the governor and her executive orders have been spot on and will be helpful in flattening the curve, as we've been talking about throughout the federal, state, and local levels over the course of the past week. And that's really important that we do flatten that curve. We're going to have more cases, as I mentioned. The key here is that we slow this outbreak down as much as possible, and we don't overwhelm our very limited healthcare facilities here in West Michigan or anywhere else. To that end, though, we need to do more testing, and that's a priority for us. We are working very closely with all of our healthcare partners, the hospitals, to develop more car-side testing locations. You're going to be hearing a lot about that in the coming days, so we can expand the availability of testing for more people. The challenge, as Allison mentioned, is that we don't have the PPE. We haven't had enough PPE or test kits to expand testing like we would prefer to do. We have some encouragement that we're going to be receiving a large delivery from the federal government of PPE and other supplies that will be helpful to us. We should be receiving that in the next couple of days. Once that happens, that will empower us to do more testing. We're also, of course, working very closely to make sure that the people who are sick are isolated, the people that they had close contact with are quarantined, and that we continue on a daily basis to encourage people stay home, wash your hands, avoid others, especially if you're sick. This is really the most important thing, and it's in the power of our community to do these things now. There's not a lot more that we can do to stop this other than encourage and enlist people to follow these important recommendations. The social distancing is important and it should be effective. We've been working on a number of other priority areas, daycares. Our law enforcement officials will have some guidance for law enforcement today. We have a nurse on call now 24/7 that can field calls from from first responders as they have questions or as they have encounters in the field that they may be concerned about, so they can talk to a nurse to see what kind of exposure they have had. We're also working closely with our shelters and our service providers for those who are most in need, who don't have the ability to plan and to isolate themselves from others like we may have, to make sure that they have the information and the support they need in order to limit the risk of infection in those facilities as well. I could probably talk about COVID-19 all day at this point, but it would be counterproductive to our greater point of social distancing and limiting the time that we're in close contact. So I'll just stop there for now and open up to any questions that you may have.
Dr. London, I have a question for you, if that's okay, Madam Mayor. First of all, thank you for everything that you're doing in the city of Grand Rapids and the county of Kent. I have the privilege of speaking to a number of different doctors in this city and around the country about this. And one of the things that has come across my mind is, from a personal level, what can we do to build up our own immune system? And what should we be eating to make sure that we are protecting ourselves as well so that we can fight this virus off? I have not heard anything of that nature except for yesterday. I happened to be listening to the Ricky Smiley show, and he had a doctor on who talked about that very thing. And that is one of the things that I want to hear more about, perhaps from the health department. What can we do to protect ourselves, and what we should eat, and how we should build our immune system up, what type of vitamins, what should we be doing at this point in time that would also help curb this virus?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Commissioner Moody. I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to improve our health, to strengthen our immune system. You mentioned a number of them, taking the vitamins, making sure we're getting exercise. There are things that we have in our ability to make ourselves healthier and better protected. We will be communicating more of those things going forward, and also keeping the stress down. That's a concern that I have right now, is we have a lot of people who are very scared. They're stressed about this, and we know that when we're stressed and we're scared and we're not getting the sleep that we should be getting because we're either scared or we're watching that 24-hour news cycle that keeps talking about how dangerous this is, that also compromises the immune system and puts us at greater risk. Great question, and we'll work on doing more of that.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. London, again for your leadership, for the tireless work of the County Health Department, for the willingness to engage in a way that is, I think, very community-focused. I've just been overly impressed. Had the opportunity, of course, to work along your office in trying to pull together some urban pastors in an effort to communicate the messages around COVID-19. And again, your staff was readily available and very, very helpful. So thank you for that. I'm wondering, though, hypothetically speaking, if we were to come into possession of a significant amount of tests, what exactly would be the plan of action moving forward? Because it sounds like that across the board there's obviously a great need for more tests, but what would be the next step if that were the case, if we had possession of more tests?
All right, so we have these two limitations right now, the personal protective equipment and the test. I have some hope that both of those bottlenecks are going to be overcome here pretty soon. We want to work carefully with our physicians to make sure that we have good screening protocols in place so that we don't create a free-for-all. On the other hand, we have very limited places where testing can be done, and we want to make sure that we're protecting our healthcare workers from everyone who's got a cough or a fever from showing up at the doctor's office. So we will be working, and we are working, with our 3 acute care hospitals to make sure that we have virtual platforms and we have pre-screening options so that people can call first to make sure that they're a candidate for testing before they show up at a car-side testing location.
I have one other question if I can, one follow-up, and that is, can you, just very briefly, can you talk about, I know for many, the thought is if one is healthy, then there is perhaps limited danger compared to what has been, what the focus has been, and that's on those who have compromised immune systems, upper respiratory issues, and those over 60. Can you speak to the reality of what it means to be healthy and the potential of being healthy, being a carrier, and therefore, if you're not practicing social distance, the potential of infecting others?
Yeah, that's a great question and point also, Commissioner Jones. And that's something that we are strongly encouraging everyone to increase their social distancing. And everyone be mindful, because while you may not be in the highest risk group for severe illness or death, the fact that you could be a carrier, you could have mild symptoms, but you're exposing so many people if you're not following these recommendations. All of the data that we have suggests that it is that older population and those with underlying health conditions that are most vulnerable. But I also want to preface that a little bit with the disclaimer that we don't know an awful lot about this COVID-19 virus. It's been around now for a couple of months. So we're making some assumptions based on what we've seen in other countries. Now, there is some speculation, for example, that in China, they have a higher male smoking rate, and so perhaps that's why it was particularly severe in some populations, especially in males. However, we don't know. Every culture and every country has got its own variables, and so as this becomes more prevalent here, we want to be careful that we don't put too much faith in the observations from other countries where they have very different variables. So while it looks like it's that older population and those underlying health conditions, I want to be careful. That's not a rule. And there will be young people that are affected also.
Thanks. Commissioner Lanier?
Yes, Mayor, I'm just thinking about that there was a 3-prong presentation, so I can hold my questions until the last prong is presented, if you like.
Okay.
I just
City Manager, would you like us to move on with the next section and then?
Yes,
if
because
there's
I think
other
we can
questions?
park here for the
Okay.
rest of the
Okay.
morning, because there's so many issues.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I should say, one more thing before Adam walks away. Commissioners, if you're not following the county health department updates, I encourage you to do so. You can sign up and get regular electronic updates, and then Dr. London has done a great job of doing video blogs and regularly, I believe daily, sometimes multiple times a day, providing updates. So I strongly encourage you to do that and to help push those messages out, even though we may announce something one day, as we learned last week, and within 6 hours, it's a different world because executive orders are coming down as they should from the governor's office. And so again, it's a great way to stay up to speed on that. And there's also a state website that provides statewide updates.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mayor, and members of the City Commission. And what I'd like to do now is talk about what we're doing in terms of continuity of essential city services. We've been monitoring, of course, as Allison has talked about and the city manager has talked about, for some time. And we've been working with the state of Michigan, the Kent County Health Department, Kent County, and our neighboring cities as we've done that. We believe we have a critical responsibility to do our part in the fight against the spread of COVID-19 at the local level. And we have a responsibility to our residents and to our staff members. And it's also important to take steps to both protect our community and ensure the continuity of essential city services. So the primary objectives you see here are to limit potential exposure, from non-essential employee engagement in the field and in the community, and also to limit potential exposure from non-essential workplace contact. And really what this is all about is social distancing for city operations. So at City Hall and facilities, we propose to, and will close city buildings to walk-in traffic. This includes City Hall, the Grand Rapids Development Center, City Parks and Public Works Departments at 201 Market, the Water Resource Recovery Facility at 1300 Market Avenue Southwest, the Water Administration Building at 1900 Oak Industrial Drive, Mobile GR and also Mobile GR at 50 Ottawa. Those will be closed to the public. We will, though, provide ongoing service through electronic means and also telephone or other contact. So one of the best things that residents can do is call 311, and 311 will help guide people to the right service option. We'll make sure that people get called back. And if face-to-face meetings are required, then we can schedule appointments through, making an appointment. But basically, so no walk-in contact at those facilities, all be by electronic stuff,
And I'm sorry, Eric, and just to clarify, that's effective immediately?
effective immediately. Effective tomorrow, actually,
Okay.
the 18th. So then, also would say that we have several really good online platforms for, we can do payment processing. Approximately 70% of our payments come in now through electronic processing already. The platform is very robust and works. So we encourage people to use that. If you're filing for a permit, we have a very good electronic platform for that. So there are a lot of ways to interact with us. So for public meetings and engagement, we've reduced capacity at essential public meetings. You see what we're practicing here. And so we will, the recent executive order by the governor limits capacity to 50. We will be practicing that, we're practicing it here today. We'll practice it this evening as well. And we'll work forward as this, our management of this continues to see if we make further adjustments. So all non-essential meetings will be canceled or postponed through April 5th. So already we're canceling the March 19th Zoning Board of Appeals meeting and also the March 26th Planning Commission meeting. We've also started noticing corridor improvement authorities and others that their meetings will be canceled. And so we're going to postpone meetings through April 5th. We're asking you to consider canceling the March 31st City Commission meeting. And if we do that, then we'll have to make some adjustments and move things forward. But we think that's a recommendation to you. And also public engagement that we have scheduled for things like vital streets, park facilities, the consolidated plan being done by the Community Development Department in conjunction with Kent County and the Office of Public Safety and Accountability. Those will all be postponed and rescheduled after the 5th of April. So general field operations, we're making changes there. So water service shutoffs will be suspended through April 30th, and services that are currently in shutoff status that are in occupied facilities will be restored. So staff will begin working on that now. At Indian Trails Golf Course, we're no different than anyone else. We have to close our bar and lounge to people inside. We believe you'll still be able to do takeout service, though, for the golf course. The interior inspections of occupied units. So what that means is that we're going to suspend those inspections for residential units that require interior inspection. So that would be for lead remediation, for water services, for code enforcement purposes, for rental certification. So those will be postponed and suspended until further notice. The exception would be if there is emergency health, safety, and welfare. That would be something like water flooding into your house or other electrical issues or something like that. We will, of course, take care of that. Also, we're suspending new applications for community development block grant contracts for housing rehabilitation and lead remediation. Those operations that are currently under contract will continue, but no new contracts will be accepted for this period of time. For cemetery services, we need to limit those to a maximum of 50 persons. And this was, we at one point were at 250, but that was modified by the governor's recent executive order. And so we will be following that order. And also, we are going to suspend permitted special events over 50 persons through April 5th. And those are operations or events that happen in the right-of-way. So we also, it's things we've done already. So we've moved the city commission meeting that was scheduled to be out in the community tonight back here. We've postponed those 3 public hearings and are in the process of rescheduling them. We've postponed police and fire community meetings on the unmanned aerial vehicles. We've canceled the remaining Parks Winter Session classes. The public library facilities, you know, are closed. They closed on Saturday, the 14th. The district court has also announced provisions they will be making for continuing operations. May Mobility suspended operations on Friday through March 27th. Downtown Grand Rapids Incorporated is doing additional cleaning and sanitation work downtown. And we're managing park reservations and basically have suspended park reservations based on CDC guidance. And now for workplace flexibility, I'd like Mr. Matthews to come forward.
So we've been talking about the things that we can do for our own workforce to be able to maintain operations because, of course, as the mayor mentioned, it's times like this that the community is looking to us to be able to continue to be able to provide. So we've talked about telecommuting, and we're going to be encouraging staff to telecommute where they can. We've been talking with each of the department heads to work with their departments, identify where those opportunities exist. And on the back end, have been working with our information technology folks to ramp up our technical ability to be able to support that work. So that's something that's ongoing, and some folks have already started, but we anticipate that in probably the next 48 hours, you'll see a pretty significant change. We're talking about allowing use of sick time for people to be able to take care of school-age children that have been affected by the closures of the schools, which is a change that we can make administratively. We're looking at alternatives for virtual public meetings and for public engagement. We don't know how long this is going to be in effect. We do feel like there are conversations that we ought to continue to have, and then we're also looking at ways that we can continue to do business in alternative ways, staying within the parameters of the Open Meetings Acts and some of the other laws that we have in place. We're also looking at the federal and state orders and the legislation, which of course, that's almost a daily change for us, but trying to figure out how that impacts operations. What we've started to do, and Ms. Farrell probably mentioned this, is we're already tracking our expenditures. We're taking a look at the things that we're spending that are related to this so that however this plays out in the longer term, we'll already be ready in that case. And then we're also looking at emergency purchasing authorities, and that's an item that we talked with Fiscal this morning about and that we'll be bringing forward to you this morning to have a further discussion. So with that, we'll open it up to questions.
Mayor,
All right,
just
City-
real briefly
City
before
Manager, please.
they conclude, let me thank again all the staff who has been working on this. The conversation that we're having today is real easy, but it has been real difficult getting there. I mean, when I say easy, the manner in which the information has been developed and presented has been made easy for your consumption, but it has been real challenging giving the different directions that have that this conversation and how fluid the directions have been. And we have a very adaptable team that have been able to pivot whenever those directions have been given. And so our goal is to minimize engagement, maximize social distancing, and continue our essential services. And I think what you have before you does that is still fluid. There are other things we're looking at, and unfortunately, it may affect our ability to be as engaging as we were to the public, but public health and safety is at the foremost of our considerations. We are not going to do citizen ride-alongs with police and fire or our refuse drivers. We've been talking right now about how we minimize social distancing in the police department in the lobby area and having more access, more controlled access to that area. And so this is fluid. This is where we are today, and it may be different as we become more operationally aware and sensitive to issues around public health and safety.
Thank you. Thank you, City Manager. All right, Commissioners, questions? I'll start with Commissioner Lanier.
Okay, I have a few questions. To go back to the earlier presentation with Allison and Dr. London. So one of them is on the last slide. It mentioned the access to personal protective equipment, and I was just wondering, you mentioned that there was a shortage, and so I'm curious to know, like, what qualifies as a PPE? Is it the mask and things like that, or what other items?
Yeah, so when we're talking about PPE, that's really an acronym that's utilized in the public safety, hospital, healthcare areas, and we're talking about N95 masks, just general masks in general, and overall gloves, gowns, things like that.
Okay.
Anything that's protecting your face and your hands from germs and what's going on.
Okay, thank you. And then, Dr. London, is it possible for someone, as we're trying to figure this out, and in light of us not having a lot of testing kits or the equipment to run the test, if we were able to get the kits, is it possible for someone to feel symptoms, not be able to get tested, never really have a diagnosis, and then get well at a certain point?
Oh, absolutely. In
And
fact,
how long does that take typically?
It varies. In many cases, the experience is like the flu.
Okay.
Generally would be, and sometimes not even that serious. So we expect that will be what happens to the most people.
Okay.
Is they'll have very mild symptoms. They'll have a cough and/or fever, and it won't ever get to the point where they feel like they need to go to the hospital.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Lerner, that's a great question. Can I follow up? Do we have a sense of timeline of when somebody who may have mild symptoms and may have it, how much time it's contagious, and when is that window?
Yeah, so we're still learning a lot there also. As you remember, there was a lot of conversation early on that period of communicability
14 days.
happened before the symptoms developed. They're now finding that that's probably not the case, that there may be some risk of transmission before symptoms develop, but if there is, it's really low because coughing is far and away the most effective way for the virus to spread. So it's when the coughing starts. The duration that someone can be ill, it really has ranged from 2 or 3 days to, in some cases, we've seen as long as a month for some more of the more serious cases. With our quarantine, the 14 days, that is related to the incubation period. So if I have COVID-19 and Commissioner Lanier has been exposed as in close contact with me, then from the point of day one right now through 14 days from now, she would be in quarantine. And because the incubation is generally 5 to 6 days, but that 14-day window, it gives us a safety buffer to make sure that if she's going to develop symptoms, for example, that we would know that we want to keep her isolated from the population for that period of time.
Great, thank you, that's very helpful.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All
And
right.
then now my questions are for the deputy and assistant city managers. So I'm looking at slide 4 where we're talking about the consideration of canceling the March 31st meeting. I know that, as everybody has mentioned, this information is changing almost hourly. So in the event that, and we've gotten some startling news about months from now, in the event that things are postponed, and I think maybe you mentioned this too, Mr. Matthews, that we're looking at technology to be able to have the possibility of continue to have those meetings at the next juncture, which I think is April 13th or 14th. So we think that, do we think we'll be ready by that time to have an alternative way of meeting if at some point between now and then we get notice that we need to, because the president has mentioned gatherings of 10 or less, so, and the governor has said 50 or less, so there's conflict there already in what's being recommended.
Right.
So the CDC guidance is what we're using and what the Kent County Health Department is using. So, so 50 is kind of a number. But in terms of technology, there are a couple things that work. One is the Open Meetings Act. So we need to make sure we're compliant with that and providing citizens an opportunity to engage. So we're kind of on this the verge of a whole new way of interacting. And that's what Doug will talk to you about, Mr. Matthews.
Yeah, we started that conversation yesterday looking at what the governor's actions up until now might allow us to do, and then what current state law would allow us to do. And, I wish that there were more clarity there, but there's not. A strict reading of the state law and the governor's authority is that the governor cannot suspend the Open Meetings Act. Nor would we argue that they should. So we're trying to figure out, okay, well, given that, what are the things that we can do to meet the spirit of the act and feel okay about that? Because there are certain little technical details. If we had all of you call in and we could see all of you on a Skype call, that's great. But the requirement of the act is that people need to be able to participate. They need to be able to see all of you, and you need to be able to see them. So we're still thinking about how that might look, but that's a conversation that we've started this week.
Okay. And then if we were to make the decision, I'm assuming yet this morning or maybe this evening about the recommendation to cancel March 31st, I just want us to be aware that in community development this morning, we made a decision to schedule public hearings for that date. So as we're making whatever decision now or later, we need to include those three. I think there's another one on this agenda. So
We would amend that then to the next meeting date that we have available.
okay, and then so my question now is tied to employees, and I'm very happy to see the usage of sick time because this is probably an area that I'm most concerned with is children potentially being home alone because parents may not have the means for providing childcare for them during this time, and not just in the community, but city employees specifically. So I think this is really good, but I'm curious to know, how will this be disseminated to employees so that across the board, everyone is getting the same? Obviously, we're talking about it here, but so that it's administered consistently. Because what I find frequently is that salaried employees may feel less comfortable with accessing benefits like this at a time like this because they're in leadership, but they still may have the same need as their employees. So I want to make sure that as we're communicating it, like how does an employee access that? And, which departments will be impacted by that? Because obviously we still need to have essential services at the same time we're trying to create an opportunity for employees to have flexibility.
We started that process last week, actually. We asked all the departments a series of 5 or 6 questions to help them identify what's essential, what's not. What could you do if we were completely shut down for a few days? What are the things that you would need to continue to do if we had a reduction in the ability to serve over a period of time? So, in fact, the white binder there over on my table is those reports. So we've been meeting with the department heads. We've had 2 meetings with the emergency operations group as well as with top management to talk through these very things. What we didn't want to do is to announce these without having had the benefit of this conversation. We also, at the end of the day yesterday, had a phone call with all the union representation, walked through this list, asked if they had any questions so that we made sure that everybody was aligned and that the departments are given some ability and some latitude to determine who needs to be here, who doesn't need to be here, and then from a telecommuting standpoint, what kind of support do you need? And that's something I think I mentioned earlier, that a week and a half ago, we had IT start ramping up the ability to support additional needs for telecommute, including additional VPN access. And right now, we're working on additional bandwidth as well, because if we have a significant number of people that are directly accessing the network, that's a big draw on the bandwidth, and we want to make sure that we're maintaining essential services at the same time.
So then will we know then which departments have been reduced? Will the public know, not just the commission, but like, will I know that, you know, if I make a phone, I think one of you mentioned to call 311 at all times, but if I were to try and communicate with a department that may have a reduction in staff, you know, how will I know that I may not get a call back for 3 days because of that or whatever?
Well, our hope is that we don't have a reduction in staff. We
Okay.
just have a change in the way that the staff are doing their
Okay.
work.
I see.
From a technology standpoint, one of the other things that we did is IT has secured additional Skype licenses. So all of the departmental leadership now has access to their own dedicated open Skype line to be able to meet with staff and things like that. There are likely going to be some areas where there will be some effects. So when you look at something like the assessor's office or the income tax office, there may be changes both in terms of federal policy and in terms of local procedure where we do need to continue to make announcements. And that's something that, working with our communications staff, we'll continue to make sure that that information is getting out.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Mayor, if I
Yep,
could
city
just
manager, and then
respond just real
Commissioner
briefly.
Moody has a question.
And we'll, as Assistant City Manager Matthews says, our goal is continuity of services, but also balancing that with employee well-being. But there may be some essential services and people where it's up to department director discretion, where we have to keep the ball rolling, and we are depending on some people to do that and how they make those decisions, particularly in emergency operations mode. I have to empower and trust them to run those operations and make those calls on who they need in order to deliver those services. Now, I'm asking them to be reasonable and also to balance the need for the workforce. But there are some departments that we can't stop picking up the trash. We can't stop providing public safety, police and fire, and other essential
Water,
support
sewer.
services in order to continue those. So we will be extremely flexible, but I won't be able to do it to the extent we're compromising some of the services of the public.
Yeah, we need to be able to respond if a water line breaks, or, I mean, there's a whole host of things, so, thanks, City Manager. Commissioner Moody?
Sure. Deputy, thank you for this report. I want to ask one thing that can be done in reference to the cemetery services. You have cemetery services limited to 50, which is great. I'm sure you're doing this, and I know that because I think I just heard you say it, that you're going to send information out to various places. When it comes to the cemeteries, will there be any information given to the local funeral homes so that they will understand and know that this is a requirement? Also, I would recommend that you contact the Michigan Funeral Director Association and get this information to them as well so that they can get it out to local funeral homes in the county of Kent, because there are a lot of funeral homes in Kent County that use city cemeteries as well. The more that we inform the funeral directors, the better off they will be able to work with their families in terms of applying what the city cemeteries is asking.
Good advice. We'll follow up on that. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And Commissioners, just to follow up on what Commissioner Lanier said, I do want to have a conversation about 2 items after this presentation. One being the cancellation of our March 31st meeting, and we would move any of the public hearings to the next meeting on the 14th with the ability to call a special meeting if we have an urgent item that comes up. So we'll talk about that after we finish the presentation. Commissioner Park?
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to Allison. I'm so glad that we had the polar vortex and mini tornadoes on the mind when we hired you, not this, but we're glad that you're here. Dr. London, you found yourself in the position of being a spokesperson for the whole county, and I just appreciate the consistent, the calm, and the compassionate way that you've shared information. It's just been really, really helpful and really even, and I appreciate that about you. And also, to the city manager, thanks for looking out for our employees. Again, with all of this, we have the ability to model how to operate, and I appreciate those flexibility and considerations for our own staff.
Commissioner Sassi?
I'll echo just what my colleague had just said, so thank you all. I do have a question for you, Dr. London. Can you speak to the dissemination of the videos that you've been producing, which I've been sharing and I think have been great, in other languages?
Oh, great question.
Thanks.
We have been trying to push out as much information in as many languages as possible, and we do have the ability through Access Kent to translate. We are working actually today to bring in vocal translation as well. We recognize that's been a weakness. It's a weakness that really came from the best of intentions. We started these before we had cases, and we really started the daily videos for the purpose of just sitting down and talking for a couple minutes about what was happening. And they became popular enough that now we realize that we have a weakness and that we don't have them vocally in other languages as well, but we're working on that right now.
Great, thank you. The other question that I had was, well, I guess just to highlight, you didn't talk about this, but those who are healthy, if they could go out and donate blood. That was another public message that you had shared, so I wanted
Yeah.
to share it in this forum.
Yeah, thank you. And that's a great way. There are a number of great ways that people can help right now. We put out a call for a blood donation event yesterday, and we filled up all the spots. And we collected 560 units of blood, so that was tremendous. We also want to encourage people to go look at volunteergr.org. If they're young and healthy, the pantries need help right now. The food pantries need help. So deliver meals, stocking inventory. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And for those who maybe are in those vulnerable age groups, especially if they're older, and we want them to stay home, but they can contribute financially. And we're pointing people towards the Heart of West Michigan United Way as a great place to go to do that.
Thank you.
And can I just want to add to that, Dr. London, thank you for bringing that up. Absolutely want to encourage people to, if they're healthy, volunteer and help and give if they can afford to. But there's a lot of people who are struggling as well. And United Way 211 is there as a support. So if people found out yesterday morning at 9 a.m. that they don't have a job and they need some support and some financial assistance, please call 211. If you need food, call 211. We have a lot of food banks who are wrapping up to make sure they can meet the need. GRPS has opened 7 grab-and-go meal sites for families, and that's for any family. You don't have to necessarily be a GRPS student for that. I also want to just put out there and let folks know that the governor yesterday put out that there will be an expansion of unemployment benefits. So please take a look at that. And then for the small businesses out there that are terrified about not being able to open back up, there are ongoing and aggressive conversations right now with our Small Business Association of Michigan, looking at ways that we can support our small business. We have a lot of work to do to help support people through this difficult time, but then also to think about how we're going to help people get through and recover from this crisis.
Mayor, may I also add, we are going to have a conversation today with our partners at the Right Place and bring in our economic development team to talk about some of the short-term recovery efforts we can begin planning for as a community.
Yeah, thank you.
Just had one other follow-up question. Thank you, Dr. London. More on the operation side. I was glad to hear about, we had talked earlier last week about the water shutoffs and the getting them back online. And I know 63rd District Court, I hadn't seen anything from 61st, but around evictions during this time as well. So if somebody could speak to that. And then one last question. Becky Jo, you don't have to come up here, but does 311 have the ability for people to leave a message? Because I know sometimes frustration levels rise if they're waiting, and we know that there's going to be increased call volume. So those are my 2 last questions. Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Thanks.
Yeah, and so I don't have any further information about evictions, but we are doing a full survey of all of those areas where people may be put in an additional stress right now, and we can do better than that. We don't need to be exacerbating an already difficult situation by doing things that can wait until later. So those are conversations that we are having, and I appreciate the city's position on water shutoffs. That's also a conversation we're having with all the other water suppliers right now to make sure that no one is deprived of the utilities that they need at this point in time. That's just not acceptable. So we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Becky Jo, do you want to speak to 311 capacity? First off, we should say how much we appreciate 311, especially during times like this. I think it affirms all of our decisions to invest in this important service.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So because we'll be looking and we're working with ACM Doug Matthews, we'll be able to have a box where people can leave messages and then work with other staff members throughout the city that can assist on gathering that information and then forwarding it appropriately to us.
Great.
So we'll put that in place. We'll
Thank
work
you.
with through Mr. Matthews.
Great.
Thank you.
You so much. All right, Commissioners, any final questions for any of our speakers? All right, thank you all. This was a really helpful and informative and thorough update and presentation that I know all of us have been eager to get, so thank you.
We'll follow up with the 61st District Court on those questions as well.
Okay,
I do, City Manager, have a partial answer on that. So they're suspending small claims actions for a period of time. They issued a news release yesterday, so I'll send that to members of the City Commission, so you all have that as well. And we'll follow up with more detail on that. Okay?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Commissioners, what I'd like to do is have a conversation. There's two items that have come to light that I would like us to consider taking action on today. One is the conversation about canceling the March 31st meeting, and with that, moving all scheduled public hearings and items that we talked about today from the 31st to April 14th, knowing that if something urgent comes up, four of us may need to get together for an emergency meeting. The second item is around increasing the authority of the city manager for purchasing during this period. As of right now, the city manager has authority to spend up to $10,000. Many other cities are giving their city managers a greater authority during this time, knowing that commission meetings are being canceled and postponed, that the city manager may need to make a decision quickly to spend $50,000 or more, and it may be difficult for all of us to get together to provide that approval. So I would like to have a conversation about increasing the spending authority of the city manager up to $200,000 today. That would be an amendment to an ordinance, so I would need to suspend the rules and then make that amendment, and then it would be brought back tonight for final approval, and then also to suspend the rules to cancel our March 31st meeting and have those items be put on the April 14th agenda. So any dialogue about that? Are we comfortable with that? And if so, can I get a motion to suspend the rules?
So moved. Support.
All right, so let's take up the first one. The first item would be to cancel our March. Oh, I'm sorry. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, rules are suspended for us to consider two items. First one would be to cancel our to cancel all March 31st City Commission meetings. Items that were going to be put on those agendas will all be moved to April 14th. Can I get a motion?
Support.
Support.
All right, Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Madam Mayor,
Commissioner O'Connor?
do we need to formally cancel the other ancillary meetings like planning and zoning and those things, or is that, how does that get handled?
I don't believe we need a motion to do that. I believe that the departments have the authority to do that.
That's
Is that
correct.
correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
very good.
Okay, so it's
Thank
just
you.
these.
And that should be in the communication memo that you received as part of the briefing. Were those meetings highlighted in there as well?
They were, I just didn't know if we needed to
Okay.
take formal action.
Yeah,
or not.
that's
I just
a great
wanted to just
question,
ask.
Commissioner.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next would be a motion, or this would be the ordinance amendment for spending authorization for the city manager and to increase that amount from $10,000 to $200,000.
So moved.
Support.
All right, Mr. Doug Matthews, you want to speak to that at all?
Sure. So as we've been going through our operational discussion, this is actually an issue that we had previously identified, which is the manager's ability to continue operations in the case where there may be a delay in the ability to make commission decisions. What this does is give the manager, under emergency conditions, the ability to authorize expenditures for the continuity of operations to ensure that there aren't interruptions in service with a ratification by the commission at the next available meeting.
Yeah, great, thank you. Thanks for that clarity.
Sure.
Commissioner?
And then just quickly, and we think 200,000 is enough. Have you kind of looked at the items? I see the smirk.
Well, he's smirking because Kalamazoo just did 5 million.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know about that number, but
That's what I said. I know.
I want to make sure that 200,000 is enough.
We did have a conversation about that, and in being pragmatic about it, we felt like if there were expenditures that needed to be made above $200,000, we would probably be in a situation where a local emergency declaration was already made.
Okay.
And that local declaration gives us broader authority. So we didn't want to ask for more authority than we felt was necessary to be able to continue operations appropriately.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and as things progress, if we find that that's the case, then we'll figure out next steps. But for now, we think this is sufficient. All right, Commissioners, any other questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
My city attorney is telling me I need to do something. Well, won't that be on tonight for immediate consideration?
I'm putting that motion that you just did as the immediate consideration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, City Clerk.
And then tonight we'll vote on the ordinance and give it immediately.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I got it.
All right, thank you. So I have both of you by my side. All right, so the next, Commissioners, that will take us to a presentation, and I'll actually ask Ms. Bohach to do both of these at the same time, presentation for the Neighborhood Investment Plan funding recommendations and presentation on the Emergency Solution Grants funding recommendations. So Ms. Bohach?
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is kind of a hard transition to make from all that you've been talking about this morning to now talk about how you're going to spend money throughout the year for some important programs in our community. As the mayor said, we have two items in front of you that are recommendations. So this is purely information today. There's no request for any action. That'll come later. This is just to make sure that the public is aware of what the recommendations are being made for the allocation of funds that tie to the city's Regional Consolidated Housing and Community Development Plan. They represent the fifth and final year of activities that would be carried out from the period of July 1 of 2020 through June 30th of 2021. So these resources come from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, primarily for the Neighborhood Investment Plan. And that covers the Community Development Block Grant, the Home Investment Partnerships Program, and then additionally, the Burn Memorial Justice Assistance Grant. So in the allocation process, we allocate actually more than what the federal government gives us in those levels for CDBG and home in particular. We include reprogrammed funds from the previous year, as well as any program income that's earned. Today actually starts the public comment period. So we would be taking written comments up until April 17th. And right now, there's a scheduled public hearing for oral comment on April 14th. We would come back to the City Commission on May 12th for you to make final award levels or final decisions. The recommendation process, we received 49 proposals for the Neighborhood Investment Plan, and that amount was approximately $10 million for the $5.3 million that we have available. So you can understand that those are some difficult decisions that have to be made in terms of formulating these recommendations for you. And the City Commission actually has a team of city commissioners that represent one commissioner from each ward in our community. And this year, Commissioners Lanier, Rephart, and Asasi served on that committee. We reviewed collectively with the Community Development Department, reviewed applications and prepared these recommendations. There's a detailed spreadsheet that's also attached with this item that goes program or project by project and can identify whether or not that project had received funding last year, the amount that they requested, and what's being recommended today. I can provide a very quick overview of those recommendations, just on a high level, and then the detail is included in that spreadsheet. Please note that the recommendations need to first tie to our consolidated plan, and then our neighborhood investment plan is a subset of that and tries to narrow that information down in more achievable outcomes. And then the recommendations also tie to the city's strategic plan. So in these, in the document, we identify first what the neighborhood investment plan outcome is and the city's strategic priority area, and then the planned investment summarized so that you're aware of what that is in totality. So in the first area, our proposals that really focus on providing home repair and accessibility improvements, and $1.4 million is planned or recommended in that area to improve the condition of existing housing. And there are 4 previously funded programs and 1 new program that's recommended to receive funding. In that area, there is a project for Seeds of Promise to access Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis Neighborhood Impact Program funds. And this would allow them to have some staff support to do the income qualifications and things that's necessary to get grants for home improvements for neighborhood residents. The next outcome, too, to increase the supply of affordable housing, there are a variety of housing development projects that have been recommended. 2 entities, Habitat for Humanity and ICCF Nonprofit Housing Corporation, a total of 6 homes for for construction and resale to income qualified homeowners, as well as a larger rental development through Link Nonprofit Housing Corporation called Eastern Lofts, where it's anticipated that 70 units would be developed for affordable housing. And then finally, New Development Corporation is proposed to receive total operating support, and that's for community housing development organizations to help assist with operating expenses for small development corporations. Outcome 3 is to improve access to and stability of affordable housing. And through this, we look at projects that are trying to promote housing stability and also promote equitable opportunities for housing. There's a variety of agencies that are recommended for funding in this area, and it's recommended that they continue to be funded who were previously funded last year. Outcome 4, reduce blight and code violations. The current level of funding for code enforcement and historic preservation is recommended for that area. Outcome number 5, increase civic engagement and public safety. There's a number of neighborhood associations that have been traditionally funded in this area, and it's recommended that they would continue to receive funding at the current levels, with the addition of 1 neighborhood organization being added to that mix, and that is Baxter Community Center. Recommended that they also receive funding for community organizing in their particular neighborhood. Outcome 6, which is to enhance infrastructure and public facilities. You may recall that in the past, we try to do all the allocations for agencies and projects, and then if there's funds remaining, we actually put the balance of the general CDBG into this category to provide us flexibility throughout the year in terms of any infrastructure type projects that may come up that we'd like to support. Outcome number 7, increase access to jobs, education, and other services. We have not been funding activities in this area in the last several years, and there's a new project being proposed that we have the opportunity to support with these additional funds, and that is through Treetops Collective Sister Circles that would help support refugees and accessing services and building economic and social capital. And this would really help us in terms of further promoting our ability to be a welcoming city. Number 8, increase economic opportunities. There are 2 organizations that have traditionally been funded in this area, and we would recommend that they continue to be funded. One of them, we are recommending receive a slight increase, and basically that aligns the 2 organizations in terms of their level of funding for very similar outcomes and outputs. And again, this is just to put the information out there to allow people to provide public comment. I know, are encouraging folks that even though we have a public hearing that's coming up, to remind them that we accept written communications. And we are even willing to be able, if someone wants to put that in a foreign language, we can have that translated.
Great.
We have staff on, Spanish is very easy for us to have translated. Other languages we would consult with. Would you like me to move on to ESG?
Yeah, why don't you finish and then I'll open it up for questions.
Okay. Although we might want to ask Commissioner Jones the ESG when he.
Oh, that's
We'll be
right,
able to
because the
discuss.
recommendation is for Urban League. Let's pause here then.
Okay.
So I want to give the folks who served on the subcommittee an opportunity to weigh in, because I know that they have been working with you to make these recommendations. My primary question is, both for this and potentially ESG, with the current crisis that we're in, are there any funds related to any of these federal dollars that either from carryover or from dollars we have now that potentially could be utilized to help people who are going to really struggle to pay their rent and stay in their housing or have other emergency needs during this time? So I'm just curious, has there been a conversation about how potentially, I've asked the same thing of the city manager, what resources do we have in the city that potentially could be used to support individuals and families and businesses during this time?
Right. So I guess the short answer is yes, there is the ability to do that. We would have to, and HUD has just been providing local guidance on that in terms of emergency uses. So we have our consolidated plan. We would have to do an amendment, which is something that can be done. But we also have to still follow rules and regulations. Some things they're working on in terms of trying to get some relaxed rules that hasn't been established just yet. Because the way that works is some things are regulations and some of them are statute. And if it's statute, only Congress can make those changes. So there's some advocacy in terms of working on flexibility. I don't think we'll see it anytime immediately. But we do have the opportunity if you chose to. But we do have to move forward just like we have in the past where we identify what those activities would be and how we would use those funds, and they still have to follow the program rules. By nature of some of the projects that are identified, I think they naturally support those things, and especially when you get to the dollars for ESG. And if, for example, the home allocation for short-term rental assistance that's already in the neighborhood investment plan, legal aid, fair housing center, those types of services, I think, generally would help support.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
So
City
Mayor,
Manager?
yeah, I appreciate Ms. Bohatch's response. And so I think we have some time, right, between now and final adoption of this. And what we don't have now is a plan for local community recovery. And I think we because it will require federal, state, and local resources, we need to be very, very thoughtful. And so we only found out about this imminent closure yesterday.
Sure.
And so now we're adding another element to our emergency response. And so we will be working on a team of people to help with, what are some of the things we can do locally. But I want to be very clear that it is, this was not a local declaration. And so I would hope that the same agencies that assisted in making these determinations would also be helpful in resourcing our local community and economy. And so we need to begin with legislatively, and I'm looking to Ms. Farrick and her team advocates to help us begin those discussions at state and federal level, but also we are, like I said, we'll have that conversation with the Right Place today and other partners, and perhaps coming up with a plan, and then this can be one component of that plan.
Thank you.
But that will
Thanks.
affect future spending for next year if we start to allocate this year. Is that correct?
So I guess that we should just be clear that when we, that HUD's allowance of us doing this does not provide us any additional funds. So it would have to, it would change what we're looking at here
For
today.
next year, right.
Okay, that's helpful. I just want to make sure we're thinking about every possible opportunity. So, thank you. Commissioner Jones, do you have any question about this before we move on to ESG? Okay, Commissioner Lanier?
Yeah, Mayor, thanks. That's a really good question about how to reallocate those dollars. And I'm thinking because a lot of the service providers are adjusting even what they're doing because of all of the restrictions that they may, if they were having programming here, it would be great if, as we're advocating for a change, that those same funds that they have could be shifted to the housing emergencies and things of that nature. Thanks, Connie, for your presentation, very detailed. My only question is actually tied to the public hearing.
Yes.
So typically, we vote to establish a public hearing, and I didn't see, so this is just saying it's a
That
presentation?
previously.
Did we do that
Yeah.
already for the
Yep, it's already
April? Okay,
scheduled.
great. And then one of the agenda items didn't have the public hearing in it, but the second one did. So I wanted
I
to make
think
sure
it's the
that that's
neighborhood
okay.
investment plan, and I apologize about that.
Okay.
I didn't mention,
Okay, just wanted to make sure we were covered today.
yes.
Thank you.
So
thanks,
both
Commissioner.
items, a public hearing has been scheduled for April 14th. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
All right, so before we move on to ESG, Commissioner Jones, do you want to step out just momentarily? Okay. So Commissioners, just to be clear, I'm asking him to do that because one of the recommendations is funding for the Urban League, and he is the CEO. So, all right.
All right. So I would like to say that we do have Courtney Meyer-Keaton here, who is the Housing Continuum of Care Coordinator through the Grand Rapids Housing Coalition, Grand Rapids Coalition to End Homelessness. And she's very involved in the formation of these recommendations. So this is for our FY21 Emergency Solutions Grants Program. And again, this ties to our consolidated plan, as well as the city's strategic plan. And we also work to support the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing, the HERTH Act. So there's lots of requirements in that, and these also align with that as well as the priorities of the Coalition to End Homelessness. And again, the city's strategic plan. This year, we received a very slight increase of $6,000 in our allocation award for ESG. However, we are allocating a slightly decreased amount because last year we used some program income that we didn't, some reprogram funds that are not available this year. Overall, there were requests for qualifications were issued, requesting projects for homelessness prevention and rapid rehousing services. The Coalition to End Homelessness has a RFP committee, so they review proposals, make recommendations on those projects, and then bring that to the steering council of the Coalition to End Homelessness. And then that approval took place on February 28th, and so now it's in front of you today for public consideration. The city would retain 7.5% for admin as allowed to the regulations, and then the balance is provided to projects. And through these recommendations, community rebuilders would receive funding for rapid rehousing services, the Grand Rapids Urban League for homelessness prevention services, and the Salvation Army for eviction prevention program assistance through the 61st District Court. And in the community builders and the Grand Rapids Urban League also receive part of that is case management dollars as well as direct assistance to the household. And again, a public hearing is scheduled for April 14th, and the 30-day comment period will conclude on April 17th. So we have the opportunity for verbal comments as well as written comments. Any comments that are received in writing will be forwarded to the City Commission prior to your final decisions.
All right, commissioners, any questions about that? Be clear cut? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Jones, you want to? Feel like I'm doing improv where you called the person back. Thank you, Commissioner. All right, Commissioners, next I'll move to our action item. This is a resolution approving the request from Spaciation Artisan Ales LLC for a new microbrew and small winemaker license to be located at 928 Wealthy Street Southeast.
Moved.
Support. All right, any questions about this, City Clerk?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, they've gone through all their approvals, so, they're just adding a location in the city.
Great, thank you. All right, with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, next is a resolution to consider zoning ordinance text amendments to create a special conditions overlay district intended to implement changes recommended by the area-specific plans. Can I get a motion? So move.
Support.
All right, Ms. Turkelson, you want to share anything about this with us?
Good morning again. I think the ordinance amendment, although the package looks a little more complicated, is actually really straightforward. The only change is the latter section of the ordinance that you have in front of you, which is really specific to the recommendation of the Southtown Business Area Specific Plan relative to the industrial flex. And so it's really moving or advancing that recommendation to allow for greater flexibility of the parcels that are currently zoned industrial within the boundaries of the area-specific plan, giving them the flexibility to allow for the use table from the transitional city center, the TCC zone district, to be applicable. So the height limitations would still apply for the industrial. It does not change the TCC, and the restriction on residential remains. So I believe this amendment does advance the recommendations exactly as it was stated within the area-specific plan.
Great, thank you. Commissioners, questions? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to a resolution urging the Michigan Legislature to amend state law to allow qualified undocumented immigrants to obtain a driver's license. Can I get a motion?
So move.
Support.
All right, Ms. Farrick, you want to tell us about this?
Good morning. The resolution before you, recommended by the Legislative Committee, is urging the Michigan Legislature to allow qualified undocumented immigrants to obtain a driver's license. And this follows two other specific actions that have already been taken by this body. One was a letter last spring to the Michigan Secretary of State, the Governor's Office, and legislators, as well as the Commission's adoption of the Legislative Priority Agenda, which specifically named and identified this initiative. At the most recent Legislative Committee, it was discussed and agreed that future considerations of resolutions related to legislation will follow the following process. Annually, the City Commission will adopt a legislative priority agenda. Requests for resolutions will only be considered if they are explicitly related to one of the City Commission's adopted priorities. Requests for resolutions will be sent to the Legislative Committee for review and potential recommendation to the full body. Requests for resolutions not related to an approved or adopted legislative priority will not be considered, and only after review and support by the Legislative Committee, along with discussion with administrative staff and hired legislative experts, can a resolution be presented to the full commission for consideration. In terms of this specific resolution, there are really three items that are being advanced. It supports undocumented immigrants being able to lawfully obtain a driver's license, and supports the Drive Safe legislation, which are Senate Bills 631 and 632, and House Bills 5192 and 5193, and urges the Michigan Legislature to pass the Drive Safe legislation, to allow immigrants to more easily integrate in their communities to benefit all Michiganders.
Thank you.
That's it.
So I'll weigh in here, just say a few comments, and then I'll open up for any questions, and then I'll call a question. So Commissioners, after we've made a couple changes to our process related to being really clear about our legislative priorities. So for the first time, we adopted a full legislative priority resolution earlier this year. After that, I had conversations with some of you who were interested in, for the items that we clearly identified as a full body as priorities, a willingness to support a resolution. And after that, the members of the legislative team, which include Commissioner Jones and Commissioner O'Connor, and I met with Ms. Farrick to talk about a process moving forward to make sure that any requested resolutions, there was a clear process on how those would be reviewed and vetted, and to make sure that they're aligned with our approved legislative priority, which we will do every single year. So those are the recommendations that are coming forward for the process, but really what's before us today is a resolution in support of driver's license for all. So with that, I know Commissioner Jones or Commissioner O'Connor, either of you want to weigh in?
No, ma'am.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Farrick? All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? It carries. All right, Commissioners, next that will take us to our next item. This is a resolution scheduling a date of April 14th for a public hearing and consideration of an objection to a waiver of the required separation distance from Dickinson Buffer Park for a proposed medical marijuana facility at 1525 College Avenue. Can I get a motion?
Can I make a motion with amending the date to the April 14th?
Yes. Sorry, I said it that way, even though it's not on the.
So move with that amendment.
So moved with amending the date to April 14th. I have a motion. Do I have support?
Support.
All right. And Commissioners, again, this is just setting the public hearing to give community members an opportunity to weigh in, and then for us to decide what we want to do. All right. All those.
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead.
Mayor. I do have a question. So it became apparent, and maybe this is closely tied to the last item, but it became apparent that as we're making the decisions about the park waivers, that there is the possibility of whatever decision we make to be reversed at the Planning Commission level. So I'm just curious if we can have some deeper conversation about that so that I can understand that a little bit better, because I didn't interpret it that way when we were creating the policy. So just want to make sure I'm understanding it accurately.
So Mayor, just to be quick, I don't think we're making any decisions. We are deciding what we would want to do as a landowner based on the land that we would have like any other resident applicant, and make our preferences known to the Planning Commission, who then would independently make a determination.
Mr. Golson, I think the question, so I think it would be nice for us to have some clarity. So when we created this waiver process, the intent was for the property owners, us being related to parks, that if we were not in favor of allowing a dispensary within 1,000 feet, that we would have an opportunity to weigh in and say, we're not supportive of that based on feedback from the community.
Yes.
That objection goes to the Planning Commission, but ultimately the Planning Commission can still approve it even if we object.
That's
I think
correct.
that is the concern of my
Yeah.
colleague.
Yeah, I just didn't understand it to be that way, and I think it became apparent the last time we met that that was the case. And so I, if at all possible, and like I said, it could be better talked about at item 10. It's just that because we were talking about a park waiver that made me think of it, like, what does the language say in the ordinance so that we can kind of clearly see that and et cetera?
So I can provide you with the language of the ordinance if you'd like, but the summary is correct. That as a landowner, you would consider whether or not you wish to file an objection. Then that objection, if you've submitted it, or regardless of whether it's submitted, is then considered by the Planning Commission. It's a little more complicated because it's City Commission and Planning Commission, but if we think of a religious institution, we cannot defer land use authority to a separate entity. And so those objections by a landowner have to come back to the Planning Commission for consideration. It cannot stop that process. Meaning, because I think when we originally talked about it with City Commission, that there was some thought where if the landowner objected, the application could not come forward. And we said that's not legal under land use law. It still has to come forward, but the Planning Commission can consider that objection as part of their special land use process. So same thing with City Commission, Planning Commission considers it, but ultimately your standards are a little bit different and reasonable minds will differ. And so they have come to different conclusions, even if an objection has been filed.
So how many times has this body had an objection and the planning commission still approved a request?
I'd be more comfortable looking on my laptop. We do have something called a waiver tracker. And I think it was associated with one of your more recent marijuana items. We don't come up with very incredibly sexy names in planning, apparently. So I can provide that for you
Can you let us
shortly.
know?
Yes, we've got it all tracked with the applications, the types of waivers needed, and whether an objection was received. I can print that for you.
Or just email us a update, that would be.
our packet the last time.
Yeah, we had a lot of information that
It's
day.
fine.
so-
I can email it to all of you if you'd like. That's
Great.
fine too.
Thanks.
Thank
All
you.
right, so I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
It carries. All right, Commissioners, before we go to our next item, I am going to ask for a motion to go into executive session. There are 2 items in executive session. We have some legal opinions to hear as well as pending litigation. So can I get a motion to go into executive session? Right after executive session, we'll come back into committee of the whole and we'll discuss item 8. So,
Support.
all right, this is a voice call, so Commissioner Sassi, report?
Yes.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Jones?
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier? Yes. And I'm a yes. And Commissioners, we are going to go down to the 5th floor in room 527 because of space and making sure that we are being mindful of social distancing. I still don't have that word down pat. So let's go down to 527 and then we'll reconvene back up here immediately after. Does someone let our city clerk know? We are back.
Joel? Eric, he's on his way. On his way.
All right. Thanks, sir. All right, we are back at Committee of the Whole after executive session. And so I will read our next and final resolution and then turn it to Mr. Eric DeLong. This is a resolution providing for the publication of a proposed ordinance to amend Section 7.379 of the Chapter 105 marijuana-related municipal licensing. Can I get a motion?
Support.
Moved and supported. Mr. DeLong?
Thank you, Mayor. So the matter before us now is to consider extending the date for marijuana licensing to October 20th, up to October 20th of 2020. And so this is in response to actions that we've taken before. The current licensing date is April 20th, and we are not going to be able to meet that date because of other events that have occurred. So what we'd like to do is recommend moving it out to October 20th with the understanding that we will work on this diligently and move it as rapidly as we can.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, open this up for questions and comments. Commissioner O'Connor?
Yeah, I'll be voting no on this. I feel like we agreed to a date of April 20th. Folks have made significant financial commitments based on a proposed date of April 20th for this originally going into effect, and I feel like we're moving the goalpost. And given the rapidly changing economic conditions here around the world, I feel like this is just us putting economic investment in Grand Rapids at jeopardy.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Others who'd like to be heard? Commissioner Jones, did you have? No? Anyone else? All right, so Commissioners, this would come back to us on April 14th, which would create a very shortened timeline. Do you want to leave it as is, or is there a desire to move forward on approving this today? If that is the case, I'll need an amendment to have us discuss this and approve it and then have it on our night agenda. Commissioner?
So just to make sure, because I didn't bring my laptop back in here, so currently it doesn't have the October date, is that what needs to be amended?
Right, so
Okay.
currently the date in the ordinance says April 20th, and so this would amend the current ordinance to no later than October 20, giving us more time to work on the land use language for recreational and the license, if we want to make some changes to the current license.
Yep, and the schedule has to do with, it's scheduled to be considered on April 14th. Then what the mayor's asked is whether we should move it to immediate consideration today, not
Absolutely.
bring it back on the 14th,
Okay,
which
so,
would require an amendment.
sure, okay, I'll make the amendment.
Support.
All right, moved and amended. Amendment moved and supported, I should say. Any other questions or comments, commissioners? All right, I'll call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Aye.
It carries. All right, commissioners, with that, we adjourned for our committee of the whole meeting. And so we will be back in here tonight at 7 p.m. And I know that some of us have some meetings between now and then. So again, please keep social distancing, as well as reminding our community that we are in this with them, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we weather this crisis together, and remind folks to stay home if they can, wash their hands, and take this time to do a good deep cleaning and disinfecting of their homes. And with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.